Now, the way that I got to the second book was that my researcher sent me a letter, the only letter we ever found, that was written by Matthew's first wife, Abby Poyen Whittier, once they were married. It was written to Matthew's sister, Elizabeth Hussey Whittier. And it was written very quickly. She only had 20 minutes for some reason that we don't know for sure. And she had, what's a long story about what the letter was about. She was writing to him. Apparently, she was not allowed to see him. He was living, after they'd moved from the farm to a place in Amesbury, and Matthew was there because that's where she was writing to. And she wanted Elizabeth to show Matthew the letter. She called him Franklin. She didn't call him Frank. But she couldn't see him for some reason, and she was wanting to see him desperately. And as it happens, a month later, they moved to Dover, and he apparently ditched the business he was trying to start with a fellow named James Hoyt and started a new one on his own in Dover, New Hampshire. That's another long story of how I found that they lived in Dover, New Hampshire. But when I saw this letter written in Abby's hand to Elizabeth Whittier, I felt like crying. And I don't cry easily. I really don't. I mean, it's very hard for me to cry. I want to, but I can't. So I felt that way, and then it passed. But then a few days later, I was working by myself and listening to some music, and something got triggered, and it just came out, and I started sobbing, with grief. This is for somebody I lost in 1841. But this is the thing that we know from past life therapy. If you study past life therapy, the emotions are the same. They haven't gone anywhere. They haven't diminished. They are the same. Until they get out, they're the same. So I'm sobbing for this person that I lost 170 years ago. And there was a number of coincidences that I looked back and I said, I think maybe she's wanting to contact me. So years, like 10 years earlier, in 1998, more than 10 years earlier, I had videotaped a psychic reading with a woman named Candace Zellner, a psychic in Atlanta, Georgia. And the subject was Jeff Keene, my same friend that found Matthew, when I was videotaping him as a reincarnation subject. And my idea was that I would bring him in. She wouldn't know anything about him at all. And I would turn on the camera, and whatever happened, happened. And what I secretly hoped would happen was she would say, oh, he was the person he claimed to be, John, B. Gordon, the Civil War general. I would hope that would come out of her mouth. Well, it didn't come out of her mouth. What came out of her mouth is, I see you in a war. I forget how she put it. You're crawling. You've got a gun and a uniform. You're behind enemy lines, and boy, do I feel like it's France. She said. This is like the first thing out of her mouth after her invocation. All she knew was his name and his birthday because she got that from him on site. Well, that happened to coincide exactly with another lifetime, a more recent lifetime as a British Special Forces officer behind enemy lines in France that he had already written about. I had the manuscript. It's an unpublished manuscript. There's no way she could ever have seen it. But the first thing out of her mouth matched exactly what he said about the lifetime that I wasn't interested in. Oh. But since then, I've concluded that spirits work that way. They do not give you the obvious thing, because the obvious thing would just look like fraud. They give you something obscure, So apparently the spirits working with her said, we're going to give him this other one. Well, anyway, that was like 12 years earlier. But I knew she was genuine from that. I said, this lady, it's hard to tell which psychics are real now, but this one's proved it to me, So I said, I'm going to try. But she wouldn't read me. She said, you have an attached spirit, and looking at you psychically is like looking at somebody in a fun house, all distorted, and I won't read you. So then I had to tell her more than I really wanted to. I said, look, what's happened is that I've been studying a past life, and I've reconnected with my wife from that life, and she wants to talk to me. So then Candace wrote back and said, oh, okay, now I see that's correct. I see that, and okay, I'll read you. So I sent her Matthew's picture, and I sent her the second page of that letter, but she didn't receive the letter. And I believe that because she hasn't received all kinds of things I'm trying to send her. She has trouble getting attachments, in email. So I believe her when she says that. So all she had to go on was the picture of Matthew. And she immediately starts out in the reading. She says nobility, stature, status. And that was not true of Matthew in terms of his social status, but it certainly was in terms of his character. And then she starts saying that the families were against each other, that there was differences in status or religion. You can come, but she can't. That's the first thing out of her mouth. And it matches the history perfectly. You know, that's exactly the case because Matthew was a poor Quaker farm boy and Abby was a daughter in a rich family whose father was French aristocracy and whose mother was old-time New England, big family. And I think they probably didn't really want these two to get married, so it was absolutely on target. So then she went on, and I won't go into the whole reading, but I believed, basically based on that, I believed the rest of the reading. So from there, I began to, really before the reading I had started, to try to establish contact with Abby. But I told her in my mind, I said, I can't commit, because we're talking a commitment here, you know. I can't commit to this unless I know it's real. I have to test it. And so I didn't necessarily expect it to come out, but Candace's reading was like, yeah, it's real, you know. So the next logical thing is, okay, you know, I'm in, basically. So I began a relationship with Abby, and what I found is it's really not that different from what widows and widowers, many of them do. They report, you know, they say, I feel Tom's presence. He helps me with problems. I talk to him. I see signs. He leaves things, or, you know, suddenly a plant will bloom or an animal will come up to me or whatever it is. There's lots of people experiencing this. So I said, I want to see just how much is possible. You know, I want a real relationship with Abby. And it's not just enough. What these people are talking about is wonderful, but I want communication.